Today I wanted to hop on and just quickly go over how to read a sewing pattern. We're just going to be going over the front cover, the back cover. What does all this stuff mean? I think if I had a better understanding of just like certain details and things when I first started sewing, I probably would have picked it up a lot quicker. So I figured this would be a very short, straightforward video to just cover this and just hop on a quick vertical live video to just go over something very simple and break it down for you all, for those who are interested. Also, I really appreciate when you come across creators who might be new to a hobby like sewing and they kind of explain things in a beginner friendly way. I think sometimes when you view those folks who might be in the sewing community, who might be a little bit more advanced or experts, especially like sometimes when I'm getting advice from my mom, she's a little bit more experienced when it comes to sewing. And I pick up some great tips. However, I think when you are giving tips from an advanced perspective, sometimes little details are kind of left out throughout the process. So I figured I would just kind of give my own personal take on things from a beginner. So I'm not an expert here, but if you are somebody who is very knowledgeable about sewing or anything like that, feel free to chime in the comments and add to the conversation. And yeah, so let's first go over how to read a sewing pattern. I'm just going to go over Simplicity as well as McCall's. I just got this pattern in the mail. I think this is such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful dress. So basically, when you pick up a sewing pattern, again, this is for beginners, so my experience so is out there. This may not be for you, but when you pick up a pattern, it'll usually have the name of the company that printed the pattern. So Simplicity, this is a Simplicity pattern. And then it has the number of the pattern right over here to the side. And so because this is a Simplicity pattern, it says S, and then you have the number of the pattern, which is 3098. And then right below where it has the number of the pattern, you have the sizing of the pattern. So I'll get in pretty close there. So you have the size, and the US size is up top, then you have the European, and then you also have the French conversion as well. Usually that is right underneath the number. And then you have H5, which is right here on the side. This is just, I believe, another indicator of just sizing, so that way you can quickly identify what size the pattern is. And then I did a quick little Google search. Google is my best friend when it comes to, you know, trying to figure out things as I am learning how to sew. I see there are a few folks who have joined. Hello, welcome. I'm just going over the basics of how to read a sewing pattern, so that way you know what to look for as you are shopping, especially if you're shopping online. So I did a quick little chat GPT search, or just kind of typed it in to figure out what does the H on the front of a sewing pattern, what does that mean? So I'm referring to this H5 right here. And basically it says the H on the front of a Simplicity sewing pattern usually refers to the pattern size, range, or category designation. Particularly in older or vintage patterns, here is what this could potentially mean. Now, this is not a vintage pattern. This is new. But the size range letters usually range from A through H or etc. It can go all the way up to, I believe, I have one here that goes up to Y. You'll see there's like a Y, and then there's the sizing there. And then I have a mini G pattern, and it has K5. So it can vary, the letters. So for example, H might represent the size 6 through 14 or 6 through 12, depending on the pattern's publication date and type. So Mrs., women's, plus size, etc. So basically that's all that means. This is a Mrs. dress pattern, and that's just what you might see. So that's how you will identify quickly what the size is right there. But again, they have the sizing right there along the front. Something else you will typically see on the front of a pattern is you will see the different views, the different options that are inside of the pattern. So this particular pattern, it has 3 different views, and usually that's indicated by these little letters here. So A, B, as well as C. And then they have the model on the front of the cover, and right there, if you get up close, it's C. So at first glance, you might think, oh, there's like 4 different views, but really there's just 3. And then they have the actual model, so that way you can see, okay, this is what view C looks like, right? So that's the basics, just a real simple rundown of what you can expect on the front of a pattern and what are all these numbers and letters and things that you're probably looking at on the front of the pattern. So not only do you have the views on the front, when you flip it around, you also have line drawing. So this is what people are typically referring to when you look at their videos. The line drawings is just another illustration of what's inside of the pattern. So you have here where you have a little bit of a color illustration, and then back here it's the same thing. It's just giving you more detail, and this is just, you know, just another way for them to display what you are getting inside of this envelope. Now let's take a look at the sizing. At first glance, again, if you're a beginner and you're getting into sewing, sometimes when you're looking at all this, it can be like, what's going on? Okay, but that's why I wanted to sit down and just do this little quick simple video to go over everything and kind of demystify the packaging, so that way you don't get overwhelmed as you are looking at it. So when you flip it over to the back, on the right side, on this particular pattern, each pattern is different, but for this one that I'm working with, you have the pattern number again at the top, Simplicity 3098. And then you have in the US size range, you have it all over here on the right. Over here, I believe this is European and French sizing on this side. But because I speak English and my audience is primarily US based, we're going to stick with this side over here. I'm just going to break this down. So again, this is a Mrs. dress with sleeve and length variation. So you'll see that at the top, it gives you a description of what the pattern is. That's exactly where you will find that. Oftentimes, you'll also hear different people mention what stage the pattern is, whether it is easy to sew, if it's advanced, if it is average. I don't know if there's like a rule book out there anywhere where it kind of categorizes you on what skill level you are. I consider myself a confident beginner sewist. So when I see average, I think, okay, I can do this. This is something that I can do. Let me show you what that might look like on a different sewing pattern. I have sewn this pattern up a lot, so the packaging is a little, you know, it's a little jank, but you can still read what's on the front. So for instance, this one says very easy, and that's located at the top. And as you can see, the difference between these patterns, the back looks a little bit different, but that's because these are 2 different companies. This one is a McCall's pattern, this one is a Simplicity pattern, and then I even have here a Mimi G pattern, but Mimi G, her patterns are under the Big 5 Simplicity brand. So it kind of looks similar, where you'll find what skill level the pattern is. So you'll see here, this one says average. So let's go back to this initial pattern. So it tells you what skill level the pattern is for you to stitch it up. Now beneath that, it says suggested fabrics. So you'll have the number, what the name of the pattern is, and then suggested fabrics. Again, it's just that. It's giving you suggestions on what fabrics, what materials, what textiles will probably work best with this pattern. So for this one in particular, they recommend cotton blends, linen blends, poplin, shirting fabrics, and vertical stripes. And then after they give you all the suggested fabrics, they also let you know that you will need interfacing, and then it shares with you what kind of interfacing you'll need as well. So you'll get all of that right here beneath the description of what the pattern is. So that's the suggested materials. I typically try to follow what the suggestions are, but then sometimes, you know, you might have those moments where you're like, ooh, I got this fabric, I really want to stitch up this outfit in this particular material or this fabric, and you use something other than what's suggested on there. But because you're using something that's a little bit different than what they recommend, keep in mind it may not have the drape or the flow, or it may not turn out the way you intended to because you're using a different fabric other than the one that it's suggesting to you on the back of the packaging. So just keep that in mind. It's just a suggestion, but you can, you know, use whatever kind of fabric you choose. Now, beneath the suggested fabrics, you will see notions. And notions is basically another way of saying everything else that you'll need to stitch up this pattern outside of the fabric. So additional materials you'll need, like elastic. Sometimes if you're stitching up something like with a strap, so slider, sometimes you'll have, that's considered a notion. Buttons. Trying to think what else is considered a notion. You know, anything other than fabric, point blank, period. That's typically what it is. So for this particular pattern, you have notions that you will need for this is you'll need 14 5/8 of an inch, so 1.5 centimeters buttons. So that makes sense because as you see, this pattern, it has a lot of buttons on the front of this. So it tells you right on the back under the notions category, that's how many notions you'll need to stitch up view A and B. So you'll see letters in front of the notions. So for view A and B, you'll need 14. And then for view C, it looks like you need 16 buttons. So that's all that is. It'll tell you everything that you need to stitch up this pattern. Now beneath that is sizing. So this is very important because this will give you an idea of what size pattern you want to cut out. When you open up this envelope, it's going to be this big, huge piece of paper, and it's going to have all the sizes on there. So from sizes 6 to 14, it's going to be on one large piece of paper. So with it being on one large piece of paper, you have to decide, okay, is this going to be a pattern that I am only going to be sewing up for myself? Do I plan on sewing this up for clients or for friends, family members, whomever? I kind of try to keep that top of mind before I cut out my pattern. I've also mentioned on the community tab on my YouTube channel that I typically like to trace out my patterns because I don't know if later on down the line if I will want to make up the item for someone else as a gift. And so I would hate to cut it out in the smallest size and then not have the rest of the sizes that come in this envelope to make it for someone else if I choose to. So I typically like to get some tracing paper. I have some tracing paper down here. It's a little dusty. I have this tracing paper. I got this from Blick's craft store. They have tracing paper. You can also use newspaper. If you like, you can use parchment paper. You can use anything. It doesn't have to be from Blick's. You can look on Amazon. There's options out there if you choose to trace it out and not cut into it. However, if you do choose to cut into it, there are the different sizes. So for this pattern, it is sizes 6 through 24. And beneath that, it gives you the body measurements. So you'll see here 6 through 24, those are the sizes inside the packaging, and then these are the measurements. So you want to go ahead and take your measurements for this particular outfit. You want to take your measurements for your bust, your waist, your hip, and your back. What does it say? Yeah, so your hip, and then it also tells you 9 inches below your waist, and then it also says your back, and it tells you again in details between your neck and your waist. So it breaks it down for you what types of measurements you need to measure for this pattern. Once you take your measurements may not fall neatly within these size ranges. I had to figure that out through just, trial and error, through practicing, and that will come up, that will happen. So you take your measurements. I might measure in the bust for one different size. Like for instance, the bust measurement for pattern P6, not P6, but y'all know what I mean. But for size 6 inside this envelope, my bust might measure for pattern P6. But if you got a little, junk in the trunk, or you're a little bit wider at the bottom, your waist, your hips, you might measure at a size 8 or 10. And so you just kind of keep that in mind as you are cutting out the different pattern pieces that are in this envelope. You want to make sure that your actual measurements correspond with the actual pattern pieces that you are cutting out inside of the envelope. So that will help you get a better sizing and a better fit for the patterns that you're working with and things of that nature. Again, I had to figure that out through trial and error, but as long as you figure it out, that's all that matters. Then it goes down after you have your body measurements. Once you have that selected and you kind of figure out, okay, what size range do I fall within this pattern, then you can go down and look at the different views. So in this particular pattern, you have dress A, dress B, and dress C. And it gives you a little bit more detail about sizing, and it'll help you better get an understanding of which size you want to cut out. Now, I know I've been talking for a really long time. It's been about 20 minutes. I don't think anybody has left comments, but I'll try to answer your comments after this live goes off. But those are the main things that you want to take a look at when you are reading the outside cover of a pattern and you're trying to figure out if a pattern is in the right size for you. Those are a few things that you want to look for. So yeah, that's all I wanted to cover today. This is getting pretty lengthy. Thanks for tuning in and checking out this video. I may do more of these. The next one I might do live vertically. I haven't decided yet or not if I'll do the inside of how to read it once you actually open up the tissue paper, because that can be a little bit overwhelming as well if you're new to sewing. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I won't keep this video long, and I will holler at y'all later. Bye.